Hey everyone, in this session, I'm going to talk about the entry point of a Swift program. Where does a Swift program begin its execution? What is the first line of code that is executed? And how the developer can specify the entry point of a program. We will answer these questions in this session. Now, there are two scenarios that I'm going to talk about. One is a scenario where all the source code is contained within a single file. And the other is a scenario where the source code is written across several files. Typically, when we write a SwiftUI app, we used to write the code across dozens of files. There we need to specify the entry point. So we will discuss all these scenarios. Now let me start with the scenario where the source code is contained within a single file. Here I have this hello world.swift file which contains the source code. Currently there is just one line of code. There is no main function. There is no specification of any entry point to this program. Let me try to run this code and see what is the output. It just prints this string hello world as specified here. Now let me try to add some code. I'm writing a class named earth, and inside that class, I'm writing a function say hello, which prints some string. And towards the end of this file, I'm creating an instance for this earth and calling this function say hello. Now let me run this program. First, this statement gets executed and it prints the hello world string. And then towards the end of the file, it creates the instance for this earth class, calls this function, and inside that function, it prints this string hello from earth, and there the execution ends. So in case of a source code contained within a single file, we don't need to specify any entry point. The entry point is implicitly assumed and it starts at the first line of top level code. Top level code means code that is not contained within any class or structure or any other such custom type. So if I move this towards the end, the execution begins here. Now first it will print this string hello from earth followed by hello world. So that's the scenario with a single source code file. The execution starts from the first line of top level code and proceeds further. Typically, when someone is learning Swift for the first time, they used to create a single file and write this print hello world statements, and they create classes, strings, arrays, and work on these structures. So in those scenarios, they don't need to specify any main function or any entry point. The program runs from the first line of top level code and proceeds further. Now let us go to the other scenario where we have more than one source code file. Let me open a project. Here I have this hello app project that contains three files. Earth, which contains the class, just an empty class. There is no method or property inside. Likewise, there is another file mass.swift that too contains a class named mass. That is an empty class. It doesn't have any function or property within. And then I have this hello app file, which contains a struct hello app that conforms to the app protocol. And it also provides the implementation of the body property. Now, if I try to run this project, I'm going to get an error that states undefined symbol main. Because here I have not specified the entry point. There are three files, two classes and one struct, and I have not specified where the program should begin its execution. Now, in this scenario, when we have multiple files of source code, we need to specify the entry point of the program's execution. We need to use this main attribute and mark the entry point. This main attribute marks the entry point of execution. Now here it shows an error. Earth is annotated with main and must provide a main static function. That is, when I mark this earth class as the main with the main attribute, then I also need to provide a static function named main. Okay, print hello from earth. Now this becomes the entry point of the program's execution. Because I have marked this class class with the main attribute, and inside that, as required, I have provided this static main function. Now the question is, why do we need this function to be static? Why is the requirement? Why does the requirement? Now the question is, why is it required to have this main function as static? The reason is, even before the first line of code is executed, there won't be any instances, there won't be any instance in the runtime memory of the program. So that means the first line of code that is executed, it cannot be contained within any encapsulated structure like a class or a struct or an enum. Now, if I try to run this program, what happens is, actually this is the project, and if I try to run this app, what happens is the execution begins here by calling the main function, and there is just only one line of code which is to print this string. So it will print this string and then quit the app. See? The app launch, it printed this string in the console and it has already quit. That is all. Now, where do we need this kind of entry points? Where do we need to write entry points where we have a class and we provide this main function and mark it as an entry point and begin the execution there here? In case of Mac OS, when we write command line tools that run on the terminal and where the user provides the input as command line arguments. So in those scenarios where we don't have any UI, so there we can write code that specify the entry point like this. We mark some structure or class as the entry point and we provide the required static function named main, and there the execution begins. Now, let me try to mark this app as the entry point and see what happens. Whether this body property is evaluated and whether this UI is presented on the screen. Now, if I try to run this app, I will be getting an error. Main attribute can only apply to one type in a module. Right now, we have marked two entry points here. One is here in the hello app, another one is in this earth class. So we need to remove any one. There can be only one entry point in a module. Now, there is just one entry point here. Now you see, when I wrote this main attribute here, we noticed an error. Earth is annotated with main and must provide the required static main function. But the same error is not shown here. The reason is this hello app is conforming to the app protocol, right? So there inside the app protocol, we have a default implementation of this main function. See, public static function main. The documentation states that this function initializes and runs the app. If you precede your app confirmers declaration with the main attribute, what is the app confirmer here? Here, this hello app, right? Inside this hello app, we have this hello app structure that conforms to the app protocol. So this is the confirmer of the app protocol, and we preceded this confirmers declaration with the main attribute. If you precede your app confirmers declaration with the main attribute, the system calls the confirmers main method to launch the app. SwiftUI provides a default implementation of the method that manages the launch process in a platform appropriate way. So we don't need to provide any implementation in the app confirmer. It is already provided in the app protocol itself. That is why it is not showing an error here. Now, suppose if I try to override that function, static function main. Now let us see what happens. We can do this technically, but there is no point in doing like this because we cannot do the task of loading the UI and presenting them on screen. It's already managed by the system. Now, if I try to run this application, the execution begins here because this is marked with the main attribute, and we also provide the static main function. So inside this function, there is just one line of code and it will print this string and then quit the app. Let me try this here. It prints this string, this is not useful, and it has already quit the application. So we don't need to provide the implementation of this main function in case of SwiftUI app. In other scenarios, like for example, when I mark this earth as the entry point, there we need to provide the main function and provide the implementation also. But here, in case of a Swift UI app, the app protocol itself provides the default implementation, and the Swift UI manages the process of loading the UI into memory and presenting it on screen. So we don't need to provide the implementation of the main function here. And now there is one more thing I want to mention here. Suppose if you have different environments, sorry, different configurations like debug and release, and you want to have some demo app in a debug configuration where you have some hard-coded test data. So in those cases, you can write code like this. If debug, we can write main, and we can provide let us look at this code. If it is a debug configuration, in that case, we can have a demo app as the main entry point. Or if it is any other configuration, we will run the main application. So here you can have some hard-coded data, some test data in order to debug the application. Now let me try to run this application. It shows the UI as demo app. The reason is, since this is marked with the main attribute, this is considered the entry point, and so the main function of SAP protocol is executed, and within that, this demo app is instantiated, and this body property is evaluated, and this UI is presented on the screen. Now, this is for debug configuration. Suppose if I edit this scheme, and in the run, I change it to release configuration. In that case, I won't have this debug. Now, if I try to run this app, it should show this hello app UI. See, you can see this. So that way we can have different entry points depending upon the configuration. So in this way, we can mark different entry points within our code. We can have some predefined hard-coded or test data in a demo app, and we can load that app as an entry point in a certain configuration. And in the usual configuration, that is release configuration, we can run the normal app, which uses the production data. So to summarize everything, we have two scenarios. One is a single file program where all the source code is contained within a single file. In that case, we don't need to specify any entry point. The entry point is the first line of the top level code, and it proceeds further. And the other is a scenario where we have more than one source code file. In that case, we need to specify the entry point, and the entry point is specified by using the main attribute. We need to mark any struct or class or enum with the main attribute. And wherever you do that, we also need to provide a main function that is declared as static. So that's the requirement. That's the way we mark an entry point. And in any given module, there can be only one entry point. So that's all about this. Thanks for watching. Bye.